Could you introduce yourself and what introduced you to Kundalini?
So yeah, I'm Sally, and I'm a teacher of Kundalini yoga. And the thing that probably most, I think, introduced me was more of a stumbling upon. It was kind of living in a place that had a class a few hundred yards from where I lived. And in order to deal with some things that were going on in my life, I kind of decided to try a class out. And when I did the class for the first time, it was really a dramatic difference. How I felt at the beginning going in, and then how I felt when I came out of the class was so profoundly different that I was just interested what that was all about. So I suppose from the perspective of the reason why I went in the first place, in one way, I was just looking for a class, very simple. And on the other side of it, I'd come out of, I was in the process of coming out of a marriage. And I'd also changed my business practices. I'd come out of 2 businesses, and then I'd moved to Brighton from London. So it's quite a gear shift change just in lifestyle and identity. So quite a lot of questions were on the surface. And I'd heard about Kundalini yoga, never tried it. And so it's kind of interesting that the day I went to this yoga studio, that was the class that was on. And so that's kind of how I came into it. And I always describe it that I stumbled into it because it wasn't really something I chose as a conscious decision. I felt like it chose me really. Once I had the class, it was like a no-brainer. I felt so much better, so much more clarity that I thought, okay, I have to come back and see if that happens again. And that's kind of how it started.
What were the challenges that made you stressed and overwhelmed?
Well, stress and overwhelm generally were quite consistently present in my life for a few years. And that I think was partly because I was somebody quite addicted to work and really ambitious and feeling that I definitely had the belief that if I accomplished so many things that I would arrive at a destination, and that when I arrived there, everything would be fine and life would be super rosy. And what I was finding was the more I was working, even though I enjoyed my work, I was really spinning way too many plates. And my personal life, and obviously what was going on within the marriage, and as I was coming out of the separation, generally speaking, it just got to a pitch where my system started to shut down.
So during your Kundalini classes, how did you feel? Did you feel better? Did you come out feeling completely different? Or what was your experience after your first go with Kundalini?
Yeah, it was so different because let's say you're feeling depressed or anxious, like a mood state, you really feel physically, physiologically, you can feel the churning, you can feel something happening. I really went in with quite a depressed experience in my body. I had a lot of apathy. I had a lot of self-narratives that were going on, self-talk that was saying, doesn't matter what you do, you're not going to be able to change. Stuff is not going to change. It doesn't matter how hard you work, you're going to get ill. It sort of felt like I'd just withdrawn from even bothering or trying. So that's like a really low arousal level to be in. To go in and be sort of hopeless when you arrive at a class is kind of about as low as I think you can get. But then to come I felt first physical changes. On a physical level, I felt parts of my body fatiguing when I was doing a movement, really simple rhythmic motion. I could feel like one side of my back would get really tired, or I could feel discomfort. And I noticed that the more you carry these movements on for a while in Kundalini yoga, that something began to change. They would fatigue, but then it would go beyond that level and it would sort of get very expansive and it would clear. So I had this nice experience, physically, that I'd gone through a process of feeling no energy to feeling some difficulty to then feeling it soften and expand. So that was really lovely. But more importantly, I felt emotionally and mentally equally expansive.
So when you were doing your Kundalini classes and then a yoga instructor recommended you do a retreat, what was your initial thoughts from that?
Well, I suppose what really happened was I was going to the classes more regularly. Then I found the teacher had another class on. So I suppose I ended up probably doing it 3 times a week just to keep my head above the water. And from there, I started to ask more questions. And I asked about how would I find out more? How would I delve in more? So the retreats, or like an intensive retreat, was about a week long. That's a bit more like a pressure cooker, because you go into the retreat or into a training. It's not an hour class. It's not an hour and a half class. It's many, many hours throughout a day. And you're also eating differently. Your time schedule is different. You also haven't got the pulls of normal life. You're not going to work. You haven't got the same triggers in your life, people, or you're not having the same conversations. Plus, you're around a lot of people that are not necessarily going through what you're going through, but are going through the same structural process of deconstructing something in their life and then finding a pathway through a block or something. So that has a lot of energy bound up in it, and it's very supportive. So I think that gave me an enormous amount of sense of personal power that I managed to get through the week, because it was incredibly intense. And being around other people, not feeling alone in the process, was quite, like, the community aspect was really vital. And that gave me a lot of support. So when I came back to day-to-day life, it was something that really supported me moving and making decisions, getting more clarity on what I wanted to do and how I want to use my energy generally. Yeah.
So during the course, how did you find your mental state was? How did you cope with all of the activities?
It was quite a roller coaster. So the activities were very varied. Classic things like yogic, normal things like meditating and doing yoga. But they were intense because it wasn't like a regular yoga class where you're doing a nice flow or resting on the floor in Shavasana or something. You were really being pushed to your boundary in your nervous system. So when you're at your limit, your mind starts to tell you what it thinks about that. This isn't good for you. This is dangerous. You can't do this. It's basically going to reflect back. Whatever's your most habitual way of thinking, that's what tends to come to the surface when you're under challenge, even in a yogic challenge. And so there was that kind of thing going on where I'm in a class that might go on for 3 hours. Is how do I keep up mentally? How do I keep up emotionally? How do I keep up physically, energetically?
So after the retreat, how did you feel overcoming all of that? How did you feel in your head mentally?
Yeah. But also like how I became more aware of how I was thinking and how I was using myself in relationship to myself, never mind anyone else. My way of thinking, my belief systems.
Why did you want to start a Kundalini class?
I didn't want to start a Kundalini class, in fact, but it became something I did because I think a teacher said to me, when you've gone through the training, the next thing you will learn more about yourself in Kundalini is teaching Kundalini. I thought, no, I'm already a teacher. I already teach movement. I already teach somatics. I don't need to teach Kundalini yoga. So for me, it was initially a real no. I wasn't going to use it. It was really for my own personal support. What an enormous lesson it was for me. I realized I was back into the student. I was still a student. And that the only way I was going to expand that was if I kept teaching.